Welcome back to Train Signal. This is Elias Kinaser, and you're watching Integrating Service Manager 2012. All right, so what we're going to do in this lesson is we are going to focus on the integration between Service Manager 2012 and the rest of this environment that we've built. We're going to create connectors for Service Manager into VMM, into Active Directory, into Ops Manager. Now, for those of you that are familiar with Service Manager, you'll know that Service Manager is not a service or a piece of software that we can demonstrate in one lesson. It's as big as Virtualization Manager, as big as Ops Manager, and it will take a long time for you to fully populate a Service Manager environment. Now, Service Manager, again, to simplify things, is essentially a ticketing system. It is a way for you to use idle best practices. It's a way for you to do change management, release control, service requests. Your entire organization revolves essentially around Service Manager. It is the way for you to track the incidents, track the workloads, track who's responsible for what. So we've built our virtual machine management environment, which is our abstraction layer for all of our physical stuff and our virtual stuff with automation and orchestration and all that. We connected that with Ops Manager for all our monitoring needs. Well, now what we're going to do is we're going to connect both environments into Services Manager or into Service Manager so that we can track the different changes, we can track the different requests. If someone requests a virtual machine, even maybe use the Service Manager web portal in order for you to give some kind of self-service capabilities to your users. If they go in and request a virtual machine and the right workflow is built into the background, then that ticket is just going to go to the right party. If that party approves that particular ticket, then it's going to launch jobs in the background that are going to go out and create that requested ticket and deliver it to the user. Service Manager is a very powerful piece of software, and that's why we're not going to be able to spend a lot of time focusing on all the capabilities of Service Manager. It's just too much, right? What we're going to focus on is essentially how to integrate Service Manager in this private cloud that we're building. Now, from a Service Manager requirements perspective, again, these aren't the requirements for installing Service Manager. I've already installed Service Manager. I'm just giving you a little bit of a high overview on what you would need to know if you're going to follow along at home. So I've installed Service Manager Management Server. That's essentially what's going to give us access to create tickets and all that. There's a second component to Service Manager, which is Service Manager Warehousing Server. That's where if you wanted to run reports, instead of putting all the pressure and all the workload on the actual management server database, you are pulling out of a warehousing server database, so you're able to query and run reports and all that. You obviously need a SQL Server 2008 R2 Service Pack 1 or higher, even though I have Service Pack 2 here on the screen. So these are some of the components that you're going to need in order to make this happen. If you're going to follow along at home, I've already installed Service Manager Management Server and Service Manager Warehousing Server on different virtual machines. Right out of the box, I haven't done anything special. They're default configurations. I've pointed both of them to the SQL Server instance that is running on my VMM server, so you can do that as well. Obviously, in production, you'd want to have your own SQL Server instances for each of those for maximum performance. But for our lab capabilities and for our demonstration capabilities, that should be more than enough. So what are we going to do in this lesson essentially? I don't have a lot of slideware for Service Manager, again, just because we're not actually going through the process of explaining how Service Manager works. We're more focused on the integration between Service Manager and this private cloud environment. So what we're going to do first is we're going to create an Active Directory connector. The Active Directory connector is going to populate Service Manager with all the right objects so that when you're opening a service request ticket, when you're opening a problem ticket, when you're opening any of these tickets, you're able to populate these tickets with the right information that you get from Active Directory. What are the computers that are affected? Which users initiated the calls? Which users could be infected? All of these assets that the technician would need are going to get populated out of Active Directory, and these will be essentially the first basic information that you need. Who's opening the ticket? Who's responsible? Who's affected? Just essentially at this point, more social information than anything else. We're also going to create two operations manager connectors. We're going to create one for alerts so that, for instance, maybe operations manager, when it has an alert that is triggered, it can automatically, as it's connected with service manager, open a ticket inside of service manager that says, I have, virtual machine 01 that's currently down, and these are the dependencies. So these are the computers that could be affected, and as a result, these are the users that could potentially be affected. We're also going to create a connector for the Operations Manager configuration items connector, which means it's going to import all of those items that are currently being managed by Operations Manager, again, for population within these tickets. Now, from a VMM connector perspective, again, this is all so that we have all these assets within Service Manager that we can create service tickets against, so that we can identify. If I don't import my services out of VMM, then Service Manager doesn't know that there's something called a service that exists, and as a result, I can't open a ticket against it. If I wanted some kind of a service request for the creation of a virtual machine, well, I need some of the assets that VMM could potentially provide, like maybe VM templates, so that I know, what type of virtual machine this user is requesting. So again, all of these connectors are built or there to populate the Service Manager configuration to give us more assets to build information around and assign this information to administrators and engineers that could then make this happen either automatically or manually. Now let's bring up a whiteboard real quick, and I want to show you very, very basic stuff around Service Manager. So essentially with Service Manager, your user might call in and you're going to open what's known as maybe an incident issue, right? You have an incident, so you're going to open an incident request. That incident request, might say, user X has just called and he's reporting that he can't get access to service Y. Out of this incident, you might have several problems that you find that are associated with this incident. For example, you might have one problem where, I don't know, the VMM server is down, right? And you might have another problem where the network at the particular location where this user is reporting the issue is down. So those are two problems that have just come up out of this particular incident. And you might have another issue down here where maybe the storage is performing slowly. So all of these are related to this incident. As far as the user is concerned, he's getting a denial of service. They are not being able to get access to what they need. As far as you are concerned, you just identified 3 different problem sets, and the advantage here out of Service Manager is that these problems could be assigned to different users, to different groups within the IT department to resolve them. So this one might go to the VM group, for instance. This one might go to, again, the network group. And this one might go to the storage group, right? So again, same incident, 3 problems, 3 different departments in a lot of cases that need to resolve them. So this is the flexibility and the ability to assign out these problems to different users within the organization in order to address them. This is as far as an incident report. This is as far as a problem report is concerned. Well, you might receive things like a service request, for example, and this is frequent. Someone, I need a laptop, right? I need a VM. I need a server. It depends on what that service request is going to be, and as a result, you then have to assign this out to some kind of a technician to address it, to resolve it, and to make sure this is completed. So this is at the heart of what Service Manager is trying to do. You might have change controls. So for instance, back up to our example here, you have your incident ticket that got opened, that created problem tickets. Those were assigned, but now the technicians that are working on those tickets, before they can make changes, they might have to open what's known as a change request, which means hey, my boss, I'm trying to make this change request on this particular system. I need approval. Can I do it? And I'm going to do it during this time. Someone has to approve this change request before that change request can happen. Or you might have a technician that's opening up some kind of a release request, for instance, whereas you have a system or a service that is going from production to, or from development to production, or from development to testing. Again, you have all of these processes that are built into Service Manager that would make your life organized, that would allow you to follow ITIL best practices, but that would also allow you to follow a structured, trackable way of doing things within your environment, so that if this breaks again, or if this didn't work, or if the problem that got resolved created another problem, well, we can go back to the technician, and we can follow up and see what happened and look at the change request and all of that. So Service Manager is a huge undertaking. As far as the private cloud is concerned, there's a lot of benefits to it, because again, we're dealing with service requests here. We're dealing with self-service users. We want to integrate our services so that if there's an issue, we can open tickets against them and assign them. Service Manager is at the heart of the private cloud environment. Now, that being said, let's go ahead and log in and take a look at how we create these connectors. Okay, so I've already installed Service Manager. I've also installed the console on my management PC, and we're logged into Service Manager. This is kind of what it looks like if you've never seen it before. Again, straight out of the box, I haven't made any kind of special configurations at this point. Now, the nodes down here for Service Manager are relatively simple. We're going to go through them very quickly, and then we're going to focus on connectors. So under the administration node, this is where you're going to administer all of your environment. This is where you're going to create all of your connections. You're going to, any deleted items, any role-based access, any management packs that you want to install. Everything from a management perspective happens here. Your library is where you're going to kind of group the different assets that you have access to within Service Manager for assignment. And we're going to create a group a little bit later on to, for instance, group all of the computers that we just imported out of Active Directory. So again, all of these will reside in here from a configuration perspective and how we are going to group them together perspective. You'll see you have access to groups, to knowledge, to lists, queues, runbooks. This is again the place where you're going to find these assets that you can use. The work items, you'll find that this node is of particular interest because this is probably where you'll spend most of your time if you're using Service Manager. And here's where you can create different types of tickets, whether it's activity management, whether it's change management, whether it's incident management, problem management, release management, self-service or service request fulfillment. You can create a whole slew of ticketing in here. And if we open up, for instance, incident management here, and we go up to all incidents, we don't really have anything in here right now. But if I was to click on create incident, just to give you an example, you'll find that you can associate, who is the affected user. Again, once we have that Active Directory, you can, put in an alternate contact number. A little down, you're going to specify the affected user configuration items. This is going to be, well, what are the different affected, I don't know, computers maybe. Up here, what are the affected services? So you're able to populate the ticket with all of the information that we're going to provide, except at this point we don't have a lot of things to provide Service Manager. So in order to rectify that, what we want to do first is we want to create these connectors in order to populate, well, Service Manager with things that we can assign. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we go to that connector and start connecting these things is configuration items. Once you start to populate Service Manager, you'll find that under configuration items, you'll have a listing of all of these assets that can be assigned within your tickets. These are your configuration items. So it is exactly what it means. It's a service request, for instance, that you can assign to a configuration item, which is a computer, or a service, like the services that we created during our services lesson. Or maybe it's a user. All of these classes of assets are things that you can configure Service Manager against, and as a result, they're called configuration items. They could be printers, they can be business services, they can be computers, they can be entire environments. Again, all of these would be filtered out here so that you can see all the different configuration items that you have. So back up here under administration, in order for us to create that connector, we're going to go under connectors, and the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a connector between Service Manager, well, and Active Directory. So to do that, we're going to click on create connector, and you'll find that all of the connectors that we talked about earlier are listed here. So you have your Active Directory one. If you're using Configuration Manager, then, well, you can create a connector for that. The two Operations Manager that we mentioned, Orchestrator, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in a different lesson, and Virtual Machine Manager connector. So we're going to start off with Active Directory connector. We're going to click on next here. We're going to name this simply AD. Next. We're going to use the domain wiredbraincoffee.com, so that's all good. During the installation of Service Manager, you created your Operations Manager or you created your workflow account, so we're going to use that for connection. I'm going to go ahead and click on next. I'm going to enter in a password here. Click on OK. What do you want to import out of Active Directory? Do you want to import all computers, printers, users, and user groups, or do you want to maybe selectively import these objects? If you click on add here, then you're going to selectively be able to import users and user groups and computers and printers, etc. You can also run an LDAP query if you didn't want to do this manually and go about selecting the right users. If you've already written some kind of an LDAP query and you know which users and computers you want it to grab, well, you can essentially punch it in here by selecting this particular item, and that'll go about populating it. To keep things simple, we're just going to go with, just grab everything for me so that we can populate all of that. Then we're going to go ahead and click on next, and we're going to click on create. Once that's complete, we're going to go ahead and click on close here. And voila, we have successfully created a connection between Active Directory and Service Manager. Well, now the second thing we have to do, well, is essentially group these different assets that we now have access to so that we can use them, right? So the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and click on groups here. We're going to create a group, and let's go ahead and move this up. Click on next here, and let's name this Active Directory Computers. I'm going to associate that with the management pack, the default management pack, so I'm not changing anything there. We're going to go ahead and click on next. I'm not creating a static group, which means I'm not going to associate this with a set specific number or specific computers. I want to create a dynamic group that would automatically, remove or add all of the objects of class computer into this group so that I can assign them. So nothing that I'm going to add statically here. We're going to click on next, and at this point we have to specify, well, what is the class of what you're creating within this group? What do you want me to collect in this group? So to do that, we're going to click on that little icon down here that brings up the connector essentially to Active Directory. Be able to filter against here is essentially computer, because that's the class that we are trying to find. And there it is here. We're going to click on OK. If there's any other properties that you wanted to associate with this particular class, you can do that. For me, at this point, this is all good. So we're going to go ahead and click on next. If I want to create or add any subgroups, you can do it in here. If there was any exclusions, so if it's adding all of these computer accounts, but there was a few computer accounts that you didn't want added, then obviously you can click on add and do it in here. I'm going to click on next. This is essentially the summary, and then create. Successfully created. We're going to go ahead and click on close. And now if we wanted to view the objects that were imported as part of this group creation, well, we can select the item that we just created and you can click on view group members, or you can simply right click on it, drag down to view group members here, and you'll find that it has all of those objects within Active Directory that it found with the class of computer, Windows Computer, and it has grouped them under this particular group that is now known as Active Directory or AD Computers. So what's happened effectively now is that if I come down here to my work items, and if we go through and try to create a ticket at this point, or an incident, let's try to do that again. Let's create an incident in here. You can obviously associate, users now from in here by selecting, the domain user group, for instance, and then just going through and selecting the particular users that you want. So for example, if I come down here to Active Directory user, you'll find that, maybe you want to associate my particular account with this particular ticket. And then down here under the affected user configuration items, if I click on add here, you'll find that all of my computers are now available to me. So I can go through and, for instance, say, maybe Hyper-V 1 is currently being affected by this particular incident that we're trying to open. So again, this is how that Active Directory connector helps us populate these service request tickets that we're creating. So let's go ahead and exit out of here. We're not going to actually create this. And let's go back under administration here under the connectors, and this time let's add a different type of connector now. Let's go through and add the operations manager alert connector. And again, the connection here is very straightforward. What are we going to give this from a names perspective? I'm going to call this ops alerts. And my server is ops.wiredbraincoffee.com, and we're going to use again the workflow account that we created earlier. Provide a super secret password. And let's go ahead and provide the routing rules for incoming alerts. So to do that, I'm going to simply click on add. We're going to get this beautiful screen up here. And what is the rule name going to be? I'm going to name this ops routing rule. Pretty straightforward. And under the template here, what I want to associate this with is let's do operations manager incident template. You have the option here of specifying, well, which operations manager management pack is raising this particular alert. So for instance, if you select this right here, you can come down here and say, for example, anything that equals to and specify the value, or anything that contains and you specify the value, or you can specify again, the computer which the alert was raised against, and that computer could be a member of the following group. And since we've created our Active Directory computers group a little earlier on, and we know that all of our computers are going to be part of this private cloud, well, then you can associate that down here. If there are any custom fields, you can add them in here, and any monitoring class names, again, you can specify those. If there was any severity, for example, you can do that as well. Again, this is that integration that's happening between Service Manager and Operations Manager, so that Operations Manager can go out and open an incident request ticket and populate it with the right information that you're providing. So if I click on OK now, I'm going to associate that again with the Operations Manager incident template here. We're going to go ahead and click on Next. How often do you want Service Manager and Operations Manager to pull? Right now it's set to every 30 seconds, and down here it's kind of cool. Do you want to close the alerts in Operations Manager when the incidents have been resolved? That's pretty cool. So that's doing that automatically for me. And conversely, do you want to resolve incidents automatically when the alert in Operations Manager are closed? So again, this is a two-way operation here, where it's closing that alert in Operations Manager, and it's also resolving the incident automatically within Service Manager once that alert has gone away from Ops Manager. So very cool to have those configured here. We're going to click on Next, and then we're going to go ahead and click on Create. We're going to go ahead and click on Close here. Now let's go ahead and create our configuration item account, or configuration item connector for Ops Manager. So what we're going to do is click on Create Connector again, and down here under Operations Manager CI Connector, we're going to click on Next, and we're going to name this Ops CI. Next, and we're going to point it to the same server as before, which is ops.wiredbraincoffee.com. We're going to use the same workflow account. Which configuration items would you like to import? At this point, I'm just going to go ahead and select all of them, and then we're going to click on Next. How often do you want it to pull, essentially the schedule for synchronization? I'm going to leave this at the default and click on Next, and then we're going to go ahead and click on Create. Click on Close, and there's one more connector that we need to do, and while we're in here we might as well just do it, which is the VMM connector. So we're going to click on the Create Connector again, Virtual Machine Manager connector here. We're going to click on Next, and we're going to name this VMM, and then we're going to click on Next. We're going to point to the VMM server, vmm01.wiredbraincoffee.com. You see that this is a very repetitive task that is very again, it's very similar. There's really nothing exciting to see here, and all it's doing is it's creating all of these connections between the different servers so that it can again pull in those objects that you can assign tickets against and be able to identify. Connection was successful. And we're going to go ahead and click on create. All right, click on close. All right, at this point, we've created all of the connectors for our environments, or at least the environments that we have up and running. So we've created connectors to Active Directory to pull in the users. We've created connectors to configuration or to Operations Manager to get the alerts and also get the configuration items that Operations Manager is currently managing. We've created a connector to VMM so that any service templates, any services, any VM templates, all of those can also be associated. So the last thing that I want to show you is now that we have all these connectors in place, if we go back into work items here, and we try to create an incident at this point, I've already shown you how to essentially assign a user account, but if we scroll down here and we want to apply the affected items, if we click on add, well, the computer thing, we've shown you that, and you'll see that you have all of them in here. But what you also have access to is all of these configuration items that we've imported from the different systems. The one I want to show you specifically, and you can see there's a ton of the Operations Manager ones in here, but the one that I want to specifically show you is the one that related to Virtual Machine Manager. So if you go into the library objects, you can even specify, for instance, the VIP templates, right? Remember that template that we had created? So you can assign that as a configuration item now as well. Under Virtual Machine Manager objects in here, you have the templates. So we'll come back to the objects in a second, but you have all of these templates that we had created before. So those could be useful maybe when you're creating a service request. Under the library objects here, well, you have all of these things that you can now associate, whether this is for a service request or if there's a problem that you want to associate these with, you now have access to these items, to these assets, in order for you to create those tickets against. So I just wanted to show you, the benefits of integrating Service Manager essentially with the rest of the private cloud that we're trying to build. With that, let's take a quick look at what we've covered in this lesson. We talked about the importance of Service Manager and how it adheres to ITIL best practices and how it's important to populate and create these connectors because you want these assets, these configuration items that you can then assign tickets and create tickets around so that you can, keep things in a trackable way and run reports against them and figure out what's going on. We went ahead and created an Active Directory connector so that we can import those Active Directory assets like the user groups and the printer items objects, the computer objects. We then created two Operations Manager connectors. We created one for the alerts and one for the configuration items that are being managed by Ops Manager. We also created a Virtual Machine Manager connector so that we can also bring in some of the items that we've been creating with Virtual Machine Manager, and I showed you how you can do with the VIP templates, how you can assign those. I showed you the Virtual Machine Manager templates, the objects in the library. All of those are assets, again, that you can configure under Service Manager. With that, I hope this lesson was very informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.